Hi everyone, my name is Xander. I am a 16-year-old teenager with a physical disability. I am a member of the Children and Young People with Disabilities Australia, or CIDA, and I am on their youth council. I was diagnosed with a disability at the age of 4, and I have been subjected to some very poor attempts on inclusion in my early life. However, I have also been extremely fortunate to reap the benefits of being part of inclusive environments. These environments demonstrated a good understanding of disability by having a range of suitable adjustments in place and not just your typical wheelchair access requirements. I had some very bad experiences with inclusion early on, as I have mentioned before, in the education setting. There were lots of well-meaning people that just didn't understand the complexities of various disabilities and their impacts that it has on young people. I felt like I was an alien. It was like I was speaking another language, and I often felt isolated and forgotten at school. My mum became my biggest advocate and spent hours insisting on adjustments and reaching out to various organizations for advice. Essentially, she armed herself with knowledge, which became power, which in turn became the solution for almost all my problems. It was evident at the time that those outside of a personal connection to disability struggled to understand. You see, I've learnt that it is difficult for people who do not have a disability in their daily life to actually understand our perspective. Often what they deem as inclusion, quote unquote, is very different to what we actually do and need. Sometimes you can find that words or policies do not appear to translate appropriate, meaningful action on inclusion. This disconnect is often very difficult to repair unless there's a willingness by general society to listen and strive to understand the perspectives that we can share. It can be overcome with knowledge, determination, and planning. Today's conference, Kindred has organized, helps to repair any disconnect by providing support, knowledge, and hopefully the confidence to empower you to continue working with your child. You see, I think parents and caregivers have a superpower, as you are in position to let your young person know that they're valued. You're in a position to let them know that their voice, in whatever form they can manage, is important to be heard. This messaging is what I received constantly when things around me were difficult. It kept me going and gave me the strength to work with the supports around me and to advocate for myself. My varying experiences with inclusion so far have armed me with valuable insight and a determination to help others understand what inclusion should never be an afterthought. I would like to see a society in which all people understand that unless we make inclusive decisions, inclusion remains a word without real meaning. It remains a word without appropriate representation or an action plan. Now, I'd like to explain what I mean by inclusive decisions. They can relate to all aspects in your child's life. For example, in my early school years, lots of really nice and well-meaning staff would make decisions without consulting the support team. They would not speak to the students with a disability or their families before making plans. We were just expected to fit into the process, which gave us the message that we were a burden or that we weren't valued and essentially just an afterthought. I felt totally cut off from my school life and my friends as I was trying to be led into an environment that was never taken the time to consult disabled people and feel like they're actually included and supported. They never stopped to ask me or my family if we felt included in their policies and statements, and said that we just have to. In my younger years in the wider community, when inquiring about events, we were often told things like, yes, this event is inclusive. Their explanation was that because it was possible to push a wheelchair around, that in itself was all was required to be inclusive. Somehow, they didn't think about access to disabled toilets or having all displays on the ground. They seemed to think it was acceptable for a disabled person to view a display from the ground, whilst other peers walked up and got better views of these displays. I hear and see very few of these stories now, as I think society has gotten a little bit better over the last 10 years. It's always important to remember, though, that they do require our input to gain perspective and make change. Through my experiences, I feel, in general, society needs to be making more inclusive decisions before there can be a claim of providing an inclusive service or an inclusive environment. By that, I mean that the appropriate people are consulted prior to any major decisions being made. It can feel very disheartening for a young child to feel and see that disconnect, particularly at school when you're trying to form and maintain relationships. I still remember the huge relief when we went to go speak to my high school about inclusion. After many years of receiving blank faces from others when we spoke about it, I did not have very high expectations. Surprisingly, the school actively listened and showed a keen interest for me to explain further about where I thought their inclusion failed. Instead of receiving countless excuses why they had to follow a set plan regarding inclusion, the faces of those across from me were seeking further information from me with keen interest. They actually got it. This was one of the most memorable days of my life. Now, at school, I feel valued and included. Consultation works very well with all appropriate people, and we all work together to not only make my school life more inclusive, but that of other students with disability also. Over the years, outside of school, inclusion was a little bit easier. Access to supports, to ensure that there were things set up for me to be involved, worked with a few phone calls, investigated, and problem solving. These skills were the skills that my mum developed in problem solving, soon helped with some of the issues within the school setting at the time. The consultation required in this setting, however, was generally instigated by my mum, as again, society seemed to have little understanding of what you need to do to ensure inclusion. The most important thing my mum ever did to help me be included was to listen to me and work with my ideas. Too often, others would make decisions for me without even thinking of asking what I thought. You have no idea how powerful that simple action is to a child with a disability, who can often feel disconnected from others. Finding a way for your child to have their say and be included in decisions about them should always be with them. That messaging that you can start at any early age will have lifelong benefits. To assist young people to live an inclusive life, I think it's important to continue with and increase the number of programs that assist parents and empower them to seek answers and support. I know my mum at the time, in my younger years, struggled to feel that she, quote unquote, had the right to question this or ask for wheelchair access. This was relevant even in relation to being invited to my friends' birthday parties, where Mum had to draw up the conclusion to speak out about my needs and ask assistance for me to attend. At 16, I now know that this was not easy for Mum, as back then, she did not initially have access to services and people to talk about inclusion, and my rights to access it as a disabled child. Once my mum and I were connected to a local disability organisation after my diagnosis, I had access to some group-led activities run for disabled kids. I did enjoy these for a while, but longed to be included in activities with my school friends. I wanted to be the same, not different. Too often, even today, segregation happens just because mainstream services find it too difficult. This should not be still happening. There is always a place for disability-specific activities or programs. They are great, and they are preferred by many, but I think the important factor is that the young person with a disability are given the choice to choose between the two that best suits their individual needs. I have found local council events are getting better at inclusion, but still struggle to accommodate for people like me who cannot catch public transport. They need to get better at providing adequate access to events through provision of disability parking bays in numbers required for large gathering. Again, the more we challenge organizations to do better, the quicker we can enact change. Having access to organizations that can provide not only information on inclusive activities within the community, but also provide the knowledge and strength to request inclusion was a game changer for us. I am extremely grateful for my mum's courage to seek support and to ensure my inclusion. I think it's vital to parents to have this support, which I now see fairly frequently in family conferences like this today. They are brilliant and represent the positive changes that have occurred ever since I was a very young child. Now, here are some tips for parents of young disabled children. Keep reaching out for support. Empower yourself. Ask questions, seek appropriate adjustments, and be brave knowing that you're not alone and your child will forever remember your support. And offer solutions whenever possible, as it may help those without a disability in their daily life to understand and make change. But most importantly, whenever possible, listen to your child's views on inclusion and how their disability impacts them. Use your superpower to spend the time to empower them to lead their best lives. As you can probably tell, inclusion is very important to me. You attending here today to talk about inclusion for someone in your life with a disability is an important step that you are taking. Each step you can take in this direction helps to build a world in which inclusion is at the forefront of everything we do in society. Thank you all for listening to my thoughts today. I hope you have gained a little bit of insight from the perspective of a disabled teenager, reflecting on my younger childhood. Thank you for recognizing the importance of advocating for inclusion in your young person's life.